Hello, I'm back for day 11 of Mice and Men, and you are in for a treat today with what we have to read. Before we get started, just a couple reminders for the week. If you're watching this kind of on the same days we're doing it in class, then tomorrow, Wednesday, your vocabulary is due, and you also have a vocabulary quiz that you'll need to get done. Then on Friday, there will be a reading quiz, nothing you need to study or prepare for. It's one of those read, answer multiple choice questions, and one CEE, one paragraph answer. So nothing you need to study for, but it is something that you need to take very seriously and that you need to try your best on because it is an assessment, and assessments are 70% of your grade. So make sure that you try on that. For today's lesson, we know as readers that authors repeat words, thoughts, or actions in order to draw attention to them. What is repeated is often a strong indicator of major events yet to come. So, for example, some things that we have seen repeated so far. We've seen Lenny say, I'm not going to say a word. We've seen him repeat that, and we know he's already failed at that once when he first met the boss. I've seen the repetition of Lenny liking to pet soft things. That's a repetition we've seen so far. We've seen the repetition of George and Lenny talking about the ranch they want to get. So they're not necessarily catchphrases, but they can be events or instances that are repeated. So we are going to start reading today on page 60, bottom of page 60. Where we left off last week was George and Lenny talking about getting enough money to get their ranch, and Candy overheard them, and he's basically going to pay for most of it if they'll let him stay and live there. So their dreams are getting very, very close. All right, bottom of page 61. George said wonderingly, suppose there was a carnival or a circus come to town, or a ball game, or any damn thing. Old Candy nodded in appreciation of the idea. We'd just go to her, George said. We wouldn't ask nobody if we could. Just say, we'll go to her. And we would. Just milk the cow and sling some grain to the chickens and go to her. And put some grass to the rabbits, Lenny broke in. I would never forget to feed them. When are we going to do it, George? In 1 month. Right squawk in 1 month. Know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write to them old people that owns the place that will take it. And Candy'll send $100 to bind her. Sure will, said Candy. They got a good stove there? Sure, got a nice stove. Burns coal or wood. I'm going to take my pup, said Lenny. I bet by Christ he likes it there, by Jesus. Voices were approaching from outside. George said quickly, don't tell nobody about it. Just us three and nobody else. They liable to can us so we can't make no stake. Just go on like we was going to buck barley the rest of our lives, and all of a sudden someday we'll go get our pay and scram out of here. Lenny and Candy nodded, and they were grinning with delight. Don't tell nobody, Lenny said to himself. Candy said, George? Huh. I ought to have shot that dog myself, George. I shouldn't ought to let no stranger shoot my dog. The door opened. Slim came in, followed by Curly and Carlson and Whit. Slim's hands were black with tar, and he was scowling. Curly hung close to his elbow. Curly said, Well, I didn't mean nothing, Slim. I just asked you. Slim said, Well, you've been asking me too often. I'm getting goddamn sick of it. If you can't look after your own goddamn wife, what you expect me to do about it? You lay off of me. So if you remember the last time we saw these men, Curly was looking for his wife, and he thought she might be with Slim up to no good. She wasn't, and Slim is really not appreciative of being accused of this. I'm just trying to tell you. I didn't mean nothing, said Curly. I just thought you might have saw her. Why don't you tell her to stay the hell home where she belongs, said Carlson. You let her hang around bunkhouses, and pretty soon you're going to have something on your hands, and you won't be able to do nothing about it. Curly whirled on Carlson. You keep out of this, unless you want to step outside. Carlson laughed. You goddamn punk, he said. You tried to throw a scare into Slim and you couldn't make it stick. Slim throwed a scare into you. You're yellow as a frog belly. I don't care if you're the best welter in the country. You come for me and I'll kick your goddamn head off. Candy joined the attack with joy. Glove full of Vaseline, he said disgustedly. Curly glared at him. His eyes slipped on past and lighted on Lenny. And Lenny was still smiling with delight at the memory of the ranch. Curly stepped over to Lenny like a terrier. What the hell you laughing at? Lenny looked blankly at him. Huh? Then Curly's rage exploded. Come on, you big bastard. Get up on your feet. No big son of a bitch is going to laugh at me. I'll show you who's yella. Lenny looked helplessly at George, and then he got up and tried to retreat. Curly was balanced and poised. He slashed at Lenny with his left and then smashed down his nose with the right. Lenny gave a cry of terror. Blood welled from his nose. George, he cried. Make him let me alone, George. He backed until he was against the wall, and Curly followed, slugging him in the face. Lenny's hands remained at his sides. He was too frightened to defend himself. George was on his feet, yelling, Get him, Lenny! Don't let him do it! Lenny covered his face with huge paws and bleated with terror. He cried, "Make him stop, George!" Then Curly attacked his stomach and cut off his wind. Slim jumped up. "The dirty little rat," he cried. "I'll get him myself." George put out his hand and grabbed Slim. "Wait a minute," he shouted. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled, "Get him, Lenny!" Lenny took his hands away from his face and looked about for George, and Curly slashed at his eyes. The big face was covered with blood. George yelled again, "I said, get him!" Curly's fist was swinging when Lenny reached for it. The next minute, Curly was flopping like a fish on a line, and his closed fist was lost in Lenny's big hand. George ran down the room. "Let go of him, Lenny, let go!" But Lenny watched in terror the flopping little man whom he held. Blood ran down Lenny's face. One of his eyes was cut and closed. George slapped him in the face again and again, and still Lenny held on to the closed fist. Curly was white and shrunken by now, and his struggling had become weak. He stood crying, his fist lost in Lenny's paw. George shouted over and over, "Let go his hand, Lenny, let go! Slim, come help me while the guy got any hand left!" Suddenly, Lenny let it go, his hold. He crouched cowering against the wall. "You told me to, George," he said miserably. Curly sat down on the floor, looking in wonder at his crushed hand. Slim and Carlson bent over him. Then Slim straightened up and regarded Lenny with horror. "We gotta get him to the doctor," he said. "Looks to me like every bone in his hand is bust." "I didn't wanna," Lenny cried. "I didn't want to hurt him." Slim said, "Carlson, you get the candy wagon hitched up. We'll take him into Soledad and get him fixed up." Carlson hurried out. Slim turned to the whimpering Lenny. "It ain't your fault," he said. "This punk sure had it coming to him, but Jesus, he ain't hardly got no hand left." Slim hurried out and in a moment returned with a tin cup of water. He held it to Curly's lips. George said, "Slim, will we get canned now? We need the steak. Will Curly's old man can us now?" Slim smiled wryly. He knelt down beside Curly. "You got your senses in hand enough to listen?" he asked. Curly nodded. "Well, then listen," Slim went on. "I think you got your hand caught in a machine. If you don't tell nobody what happened, we ain't going to. But you just tell and try to get this guy canned, and we'll tell everybody, and then will you get the laugh." "I won't tell," said Curly. He avoided looking at Lenny. Buggy wheels sounded outside. Slim helped Curly up. "Come on now. Carlson's going to take you to a doctor." He helped Curly out the door. The sound of wheels drew away. In a moment, Slim came back into the bunkhouse. He looked at Lenny, still crouched fearfully against the wall. "Let's see your hands," he asked. Lenny stuck out his hands. "Christ almighty, I hate to have you mad at me," Slim said. George broke in. "Lenny was just scared," he explained. "He didn't know what to do. I told you nobody ought never to fight him." "No, I guess it was Candy I told." Candy nodded solemnly. "That's just what you done," he said. "Right this morning when Curly first lit into your friend, he says, he better not fool with Lenny if he knows what's good for him. It's just what you says to me." George turned to Lenny. "It ain't your fault," he said. "You don't need to be scared now. You done just what I told you to. Maybe you better go in the washroom and clean up your face. You look like hell." Lenny smiled with his bruised mouth. "I didn't want no trouble," he said. He walked toward the door, but just before he came to it, he turned back. "George, what you want?" "I can still tend the rabbits, George." "Sure, you ain't done nothing wrong." "I didn't mean no harm, George." "Well, get the hell out and wash your face." Okay, so this is quite a momentous time in our book, and just to make sure that you understand what happened, Curly comes back in. Was itching for a fight with Slim, but Slim's not having it. He's like, "Curly, you're being dumb." He's not listening to it. The other guys are now poking at Curly, and he needs to stand up and show that he is strong. And he sees Lenny just sitting there smiling, and he assumes Lenny's laughing at him. Lenny's not. He's thinking about rabbits. Make Lenny happy, and he's just daydreaming over there. And Curly just attacks him, and he starts punching him in the face and punching him in the gut, and there's blood coming down Lenny's face, and he's crying because he doesn't know what's happening. But remember, Lenny's a lot bigger than Curly. But Lenny doesn't think to fight him. Like, he just wants to know why Curly's hurting him, until George tells him to fight back because he listens to George. Lenny only does one thing. As Curly's fist goes towards Lenny's face again, Lenny just grabs his fist like this and crushes every bone in his hand. I want you to think about what kind of strength it would take to crush every bone in someone's hand. And he doesn't let go, not even when George tells him to let go, because if you remember, when Lenny is in an intense moment, he grabs on and doesn't let go, just like he did with that girl's dress. Okay, he wasn't necessarily trying to hurt her, but he didn't know what to do, and he clammed up, and that's what happens now. And George, again, has to hit him over the head several times to get him to let go. Then we are told that every bone in Curly's hand is broken. They convince Curly not to say anything because this really doesn't make Curly look good, you know. Even though Lenny is bigger than him, he took him out with just his hand. So they say to Curly, look, we're going to tell everybody what happened unless you lie and say you got your hand caught in a machine. So again, George takes care of Lenny, and Lenny doesn't face any consequences for this. You know, he was defending himself, and you can look at it that way. And that's how George and Slim and everybody looks at it. And so they say, Lenny, it's not your fault. You were defending yourself. And the only thing that Lenny's worried about in this moment is, do I get to tend the rabbits? Because George told him if he got in trouble, he wouldn't be allowed to tend the rabbits. But George says, nope, wasn't your fault. You'll still get to tend the rabbits. So Curly's off to the hospital, and Lenny's off to get cleaned up. And, you know, we don't know how Curly will handle this once he's not in so much pain. Our repetition here is this idea that Lenny accidentally hurts people. He accidentally kills mice. He accidentally grabs a girl who thought she was being sexually assaulted by him. He accidentally breaks every bone in Curly's hand. We still have more going on in our book here. This is not the climax of our book. We have more that's going to happen, but we need to start paying attention to the fact that Lenny hurts people, and that also Lenny doesn't face consequences for hurting people. Mice, they die. Who cares? We kill them all the time anyway, right? The girl, George gets him out of town, and you could argue that that's a consequence, but there's no legal consequences or really having to face the wrath of other people. And now Curly, they're going to lie and say that Curly's hand got caught in a machine, which is another thing that should let you know just how terribly messed up his hand was, that they're going to say it got caught in a machine. So for your book today, you want to think about what things you've seen repeated in your book, maybe catchphrases, maybe events, things of that nature. Again, if you can't find something that relates to the lesson, just go ahead and pull any sort of significant quote and write down why you think it's significant. Vocab quiz tomorrow, so there will be no of Mice and Men until Thursday, and then reading test on Friday. And I will see you for day 12.